Hi, my name is Jason Hooper from FixYourGut.com, and today I would like to join in the discussion of when is the best time to take your probiotic supplement. Now, there's a lot of information out there, and a lot of the high-ranking SEO health sites on Google pretty much all point to the same conclusion, and they seem to say that you should take your probiotic with food, but I disagree, and in this video I'm going to explain why I disagree, and I'm going to challenge some of the health experts that they've cited on their web pages, and why I think that you should take your probiotic supplement fasted on an empty stomach. Now, I just want to be fair with all of these scientists that have gone on record with these health sites, because I've been interviewed a lot by journalists, and some of these conversations are quite detailed and complicated, and often they just take like a sentence from an hour-long conversation, and it's not even really what you said. It's like a summary or something that they've tried to curate for their listeners or readers to fill a certain need. So this may not be exactly the opinion of these people, but it's on their sites, and so I just want to challenge these statements. All right, the first quote comes from David Friedman, and it says, "Probiotics are living organisms. They need food, water, and warmth to survive and multiply. In the morning, conditions are not optimal for probiotics simply because there is not enough food or water for the bacterial strains to flourish." So basically, we have the argument of not taking probiotics in the morning because lack of nutrients and starvation. I don't think warmth is going to be an issue here in the three factors listed, because the body should be around 98.6 degrees, so should be plenty warm enough for bacteria to incubate and grow. So getting at the heart of the argument is starvation. So before the probiotic supplement can hydrate from its dehydrated form, does it have the nutrients it needs to be able to multiply, or will it die off because the environment isn't correct for them to survive? I'd like to get into a little bit the manufacturing process of how probiotics are made, and maybe that'll give us some understanding and insight into how they rehydrate and take hold in the body. So the first thing that probiotic supplement companies do is they select their strains of bacteria, and they try to create conditions where only the bacteria they want can grow and nothing else can grow in that solution. We call this a minimal state solution, and bacteria, they need certain amino acids and other nutrients, and they may not need others, and so we eliminate everything they don't need and we give them just what they need to help prevent contamination. Once we get the strain and make sure that everything is all set up to where we only get what we want in the solution, they take the suspended solution and they pour it into these large stainless steel trays, because we want a lot of surface area, because we're going to try to turn this into a powdered substance. So large stainless steel trays, and then we got to flash freeze it as quickly as possible. The longer it takes for the temperature to drop, the more cold shock stress is on the organism, which disrupts their metabolic processes, and they can die in the process. So we got to freeze them quick before we can transfer them. So we have our culture of bacteria, we have it flash frozen, then we're going to put it into another freezer that's very, very cold, and it has fans in the back, which sort of acts sort of like the reverse of a convection oven or air fryer. It takes all the moisture out, and it allows the ice to sublimate, so that all of the ice turns into water vapor, gets blown out of the chamber, and you're left with a powder. Now, this powder contains the bacteria, and it also contains the remnants from the minimal state solution that was used to culture the bacteria in the first place. So the bacteria does have some nutrients along with it, so that when you ingest that powder, the bacteria rehydrate and they have food to eat. Now, what I've just described is sort of the ideal process for creating a probiotic supplement. Not all supplement companies do it this way. A lot of them cut corners, actually. They freeze it too slow, it kills the organisms, or they don't flash freeze it correctly, or something goes wrong, or worst case scenario, they have a contaminant in there, some sort of pathogenic agent gets into that solution and starts to multiply. And now you're taking a probiotic that has something else in there that you really don't want, and yikes, stay away from that. That's why you should always be very, very careful about taking a probiotic supplement and take it from a trusted company. The company that we recommend on Fix Your Gut is Smidge, and they have a product called Sensitive Probiotic. Smidge used to be called Gut Pro. They rebranded as Smidge, kind of like Gut Pro better. Smidge, I don't really dig that, but they do make good probiotics, so check out Smidge. I'm going to have a link to the product in the description below. If you would like to support Fix Your Gut, please click on that product link. If you would like to order their probiotic supplement, we get a little piece of that revenue and it helps support our site. We have a lot of people working behind the scenes and they need to get paid. And we have a lot of people, I guess, in front of the scenes also, like myself, and I have 3 small children and they need food. So help support my kids. It's the weird thing about small children. You have to feed them like every day. So after the supplement is manufactured, you have to transfer it to some sort of a packaging container. Hopefully there's some sort of dehydrated packet inside that prevents moisture from forming. And hopefully it's stored in a climate and humidity controlled environment. From my experience in working in the supplement industry, a lot of these warehouses are not temperature controlled or humidity controlled whatsoever. And that's pretty sad. A lot of these supplements that you're taking are from these warehouses or shipping facilities, and a lot of the ingredients are no longer bioactive because of the temperatures or the humidity. Again, that's why you need a high quality supplement. I wouldn't play around and I wouldn't take chances because you're really messing around with what's going on inside your gut, and that's going to affect your overall health. I mean, just take a look at what happened with our friends over at Soylent when it turns out that they had a rat infestation inside their facility, and then all of a sudden rat poo was getting into the product, and geez, you're definitely getting some probiotics along with your Soylent. And Soylent wasn't the only company. I mean, right across the street was another warehouse from another supplement company, and they're just all in that general area, and just contamination everywhere. So be very careful who you order your supplements from. Another thing that I really like about Smidge, formerly Gut Pro, is when they ship their product, they ship it with a cold pack to keep the inside of the box temperature controlled so that it doesn't get too hot or too humid, won't rehydrate the bacteria so that they die, and it won't allow water to get in or moisture to get in so they rehydrate too early. That way you can mix up the powder inside water or whatever you take it with, drink it, and rehydrates in the GI. So the goal is to get that probiotic bacteria to the part of the GI that it's going to live and stay in, which should have enough nutrients for it to survive already. If the bacteria can't grow and there's not enough nutrients within the gut already for it to survive, I don't know why you're taking it in the first place, because it's not going to survive there anyway, no matter what sort of conditions, whether you take it AM, PM, right at noon, it doesn't really matter if it doesn't have the stuff inside your gut to survive. So a healthy diet is going to support your probiotic bacteria. Make sure that you eat right, or else you're wasting your money with a probiotic supplement. But then the question is, can the probiotic bacteria get to the part of the gut where it's going to live with the amount of nutrients? And that sort of depends on your overall health and your MMC function. What is MMC function? It's kind of like when your stomach is rumbling and that motor cortex is moving around through electrochemical energy, moves food around. If you have a slow GI transit rate, the probiotic bacteria is going to get to different places at different times. If you have a too fast of a bowel transit rate, the probiotic bacteria might go past where you want it to go, and then it doesn't have time to get set up and start thriving. So is it true that there's not enough food and water for bacteria to thrive and flourish? Well, hopefully you're taking your probiotic supplement with water, so that should solve that problem. And hopefully, in the process of flash freezing the probiotic in its manufacturing process, it hasn't completely exhausted the nutrients it needs. So it should be able, in most cases, it should be able to get in the right place of the gastrointestinal tract before it starves to death. Our next quote comes from Vincent Pedre, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he states, "With probiotics, it's all about survival. These delicate microorganisms must survive several obstacles: the manufacturing process, shelf life, and, once you take them, acid in your stomach environment to reach your intestines where they do their job." So again, the premise of this argument is, can the bacteria get to where they need to go to thrive? And this takes a different angle. So I agree with Pedre on the manufacturing process. Like, did we kill off all the bacteria before they even get to you in the first place? That's something you need to look into. I disagree on the side of the acids killing the bacteria off. And also, not all of the bacteria are going to the colon. A lot of them are going to go to the upper gut. So a popular genus of probiotic that lots of people take are Lactobacillus. And if we look at it, we have Lactobacillus. Okay, it's one word, but I spaced them out so we can kind of break down what this means. Okay, so lacto referring to lacto fermentation. Okay, bacillus meaning rod shaped. Okay, so it looks like this. Draw some cilia. Let's give it a smiley face too. I feel like the Bob Ross of micro a little bit. But anyway, so let's talk about the lacto portion of this first. There was, I would say, a recent discovery, but fairly recent discovery, that lactobacillus reside in the upper gut, not just the colon. And this is very important because if you're taking a lactobacillus supplement, it might be because you need to counteract an upper gut infection like H. pylori. And there's an inverse relationship between lactobacillus and H. pylori, which means that the more lactobacillus that you have in your gut, the less H. pylori, and vice versa. So some people are choosing to take this supplement to create balance in the microbiome in the upper gut. So yes, these organisms are capable of lactofermentation, but they're also capable of respiration. So what does that mean? Well, lactofermentation usually occurs in an anaerobic environment, meaning that there's no oxygen there, and so it uses lactic acid for energy in the electron exchange. Through respiration, it goes through the Krebs cycle using oxygen. So the environment determines which one is which. You know, if it's bottled up in some sort of suspension like kefir or something like that, then it's going to go to its anaerobic state. And there are some environmental situations where it can go into an aerobic state, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So lactobacillus are generally oxygen-tolerant anaerobes, which means they're capable of both anaerobic activity and aerobic activity. But we have to have certain conditions for that to be set up. In the upper gut, so when would these organisms use anaerobic activity instead of aerobic activity? Well, a lot of that depends on the pH of the environment. What is pH? pH is potential of hydrogen. It surprises me how many people talk about pH and really have no concept of or framework of what it means. When pH increases, that means there's more potential for hydrogen, more room for hydrogen ions. When pH decreases, that means there's less potential for hydrogen because there's already lots of hydrogen ions. Low pH is a more acidic environment. High pH is a more basic environment. That's some things that a lot of young students and chemistry students get confused, is that a high pH is basic. The low pH is acidic. Some people think that that's flipped around, like shouldn't a high pH be more acidic? No, it's more alkaline. So this is important to keep track of, because the more acidic it is, the more hydrogen ions that we have, and this just happens to be the environmental condition that's needed for lactobacillus to respirate. It activates genetic pathways that allow this organism to utilize oxygen for energy. A lactobacillus supplement on an empty stomach is going to be in the pH range that they need to thrive. So we don't need to worry about acid for that particular supplement. So what about other bacteria? What about something like bifidobacteria, which is another common probiotic supplement? They're not acidophiles. Their range is from about 4.5 to 8.5 right here. So then the question is, will stomach acid kill off those bacteria before they can reach the colon? Because clearly these are not going to be thriving in the upper gut. Well, it just so happens that supplement companies have thought about this, and they engineer and design bacteria with certain strains and certain strain markers that can tolerate those conditions for extended periods of time. Now, so how do they find these bacteria? Well, they create a culture and they expose it to acid, and the ones that can't tolerate it die off, and the ones that can't stick around, and they expose large batches of bacteria to these acids for extended periods of time, and then they keep culturing them until they develop a mutant strain that serves their purpose. So this particular type of Longorium biotype, NCIMB 8809, is a pH-resistant strain that was developed for just such a purpose. Now, in this study, there were cultures that were incubated at 37 degrees Celsius for 16 hours, and then for 3 to 4 days, they exposed it to acid in a pH range of 2.0, which is about the pH range of an empty stomach first thing in the morning. And they wanted to see if they could culture what was left over, and sure enough, they were able to do that. So by doing this experiment and this development, they proved that they could create a strain that could survive gastric transport to the colon. Again, it's very important to invest in a high-quality supplement, because if you just take any strain from anywhere, it may not have acid resistance, and you may not get the benefit that you're looking for. So again, that's why I like to recommend Smidge, because I know they have engineered strains that work, and even though I don't like the name Smidge as much as Gut Pro, maybe that name will grow on me, just like I know their bacteria will grow in me. So getting back to that quote that I'm challenging, I think there's a misunderstanding of the pH resistance of bacteria and which bacteria go where in the GI. That's where I have the disagreement with these recommendations to take a probiotic with food, because the strains that I recommend and the conditions that appear in the upper gut are favorable of an empty stomach instead of a full stomach. All right, the next quote that I'd like to challenge comes from Robert Zimbrowski, and he says, in a fasted state, or when you have an empty stomach, your stomach is more acidic and has a pH around 2. Again, in this article, David Friedman chimes in and he says, the biggest danger for probiotics is the powerful acids in the digestive system, which are meant to break down and disintegrate materials that travel through it. If enough acid overcomes the coating of a probiotic capsule, it could kill the delicate strains. So here, Friedman seems to be arguing for an enteric-coated probiotic or microencapsulated probiotic that's designed to break down over time until it gets to the colon. Okay, that's one way to do it, but it's probably not necessary if you're taking a quality powdered form probiotic. So if you are taking one of those microencapsulated probiotics or enterically coated probiotics, you should take it on a full stomach. I agree with that because you need to break down the coating or else it's going to pass right through and you're going to have no benefit from it at all, which can also be sort of tricky because you want it to dissolve the coating, but you don't want it to kill off what's inside the coating. So I don't think that's as effective, and that's why I like the powdered supplements better, the ones that are engineered and designed to be effective in that way. So yes, the upper gut tends to be very acidic, and on an empty stomach has a pH of around 2, and then when you eat food, it dilutes that environment so that the pH raises because the acid becomes diluted, thereby making a higher potential for hydrogen in the upper gut. Where I think that we need more understanding is that it's not just the acid alone that can damage the bacteria, but the bile salts that disrupt the cell membrane. So if you think of a bacterium, let's just say this is the cell wall here, and the cell wall is made up of phospholipids. So you have phosphate groups here, which are hydrophilic, which means that they like water, and then we have the lipid portion or the fat portion of it, the tails, that are hydrophobic. So they kind of keep the water out of the cell. Okay, and then we have the same thing on the inside because it's a bilayer sheath. Bilipid layer isn't necessarily the issue here when it comes to the destruction of the cell through acids. We have to figure out what's going on in the inside of the cell, and if the inside of the cell becomes too acidic, then certain enzymes won't react properly for metabolism, and the bacteria dies from that. So it has to be able to regulate itself to be able to, if it gets too acidic inside the cell, to have a hydrogen pump that pumps the hydrogen ions out. So we got to have some sort of protein here that pumps hydrogen ions inside and outside of the cell. We call that a proton pump, and it helps to maintain homeostasis within the cell. From an evolutionary standpoint, most bacteria have such a process, or else they'd be so fragile they couldn't make it in the world. They'd all die off if they couldn't maintain some sort of homeostasis here to regulate the pH of the inside of the cell. The danger comes when we have transport mechanisms because stuff has to be able to get inside the cell, nutrients need to get in for metabolic processes, and those are made up of proteins. So when the pH outside the cell gets too low, what can happen is the amino acids that form these proteins that make up the transports can start to unravel and fold apart, and then that kills the cell. Also, if this regulation process isn't quick enough and there's a drop in pH that's too severe that homeostasis can't occur quickly, the organism will also die. But perhaps the biggest danger and the potential for risk for the membrane, the fatty layers that are most exposed to the environment, are the bile salts that can really do damage to the exterior of the cell. And this is another disagreement that I have with the literature, is because the regulation of biosalts has to do with what's happening in the environment. So when you're eating more food, more biosalts are going to be produced. And there are two main genes that regulate the production of biosalts. If we didn't have any regulation of biosalts, they would just keep being manufactured and built up and reach toxic levels, and that wouldn't be good. So fortunately, our bodies have a way to regulate the biosalts so that we produce just enough. So we have farcinoid X receptor genes, and we have fibroblast growth factor 19. And these are important genes too, because as we go on in the gut health series, they also have an effect on metabolism. So if you're having transcription errors here, you could really have a lot of problems with your metabolism and weight gain. So when these two genes are encoded, it makes receptor sites on the outside of the epithelial cells, so like the linings of your stomach, the linings of your intestines, and all the way through. And what happens is when these receptor sites are full, meaning that the bile acids and bile salts are free enough and not binding with foodstuffs and maybe bacteria, they're latched onto the receptors, and then your body knows not to make any more of them. When food comes through, the bile salts detach from the receptor sites and work to help digest food. And then so it signals the cells to produce more bile. So it's a greater risk to the cell walls of bacteria when you're eating food, because it's not just the pH that's damaging to the bacteria, but it's the bile salts that come in and can destroy the cell membranes. All right, so let's take a look at how that happens. Okay, this is the A group, B group, C group, and we have the D group up here. It's just a pentagon though, so it's like this, okay? And then we've got some hydroxyl groups here. All right, let's fast forward through here. Enough Bob Ross. So what we have here is cholic acid. And cholic acid combines with two different amino acids to form different biosalts, glycine and taurine. So when it combines with glycine, it's glycocholic acid. And when it combines with taurine, it's taurocholic acid. The amine group, and I'm kind of getting out of frame here, but it replaces this peroxyl group with the amine group, and then the amino acid attaches through that, and that's part of the process where lipase comes in to combine with these bile salts to break down the fats. Again, this is a rate-limited process, and so when we're eating food, this process is increased, and this thing will now react to that thing, and it will damage the bacterial cells, lyse the cell open, all of its material spills out, and if it's the wrong kind of bacterial that has endotoxin in the cell membrane, well, that's horrible because that gets spilled out too. And of course, we really want to limit the amount of lipopolysaccharide in the gut because it can cause all kinds of health issues. So then again, when we're talking about the digestion of fats and we're talking about lipase, what is the pH range that lipase digests fats? Okay, for that pH range of lipase, we're talking about a pH of 3 to 6. Now think about this, because in a fasted state, the stomach is at about a pH of 2, which is out of range for lipase to digest these fats. You increase that range from 3 to 6, well, that's not good, because now lipase can act upon the bile to make bile salts and digest fats, which are mostly what comprises the cell membranes for bacteria. So the point I'm trying to make is that the pH, or the amount of acid in the stomach, is not the only factor. It is a factor on whether or not a probiotic supplement is going to survive and get where it needs to go. But there's lots of other factors too, and this is a big one. Now, if you talk to a microbiologist that works in a lab, they'll probably talk about AFB. Which are acid-fast bacteria. When they study bacteria, they try to apply a stain to the cell walls of the bacteria, but some of them are resistant to this, or acid-fast, so it makes them difficult to stain with acids or with ethanols, and some of them are resistant to gram stains. And the reason why I point this out is because a lot of microbes have resistance to acid stress. So like a lot of these acid-fast bacteria have developed cycloprotein acyl chains that make them resistant. They didn't do this just to irritate researchers. They did it to survive, at least temporarily, in low pH environments until hopefully they could get into their range for survival. We also have to understand that over time, bacteria have evolved repair mechanisms that when something got damaged inside the cell due to low pH environment, there's mechanisms that go and repair proteins that were damaged from low pH or acids. So we've gone over a lot of material, and the things that I agree with these gut health experts are on the importance of the quality of the supplements that you take. That's the number one important thing that you need to take away from this, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, or agree with them or disagree with them. When it comes to probiotics, do not mess around. Make sure you're taking a high quality supplement. And I hope that some of the information that I've given you today at least gives you pause to consider maybe some of the other factors besides just pH that would encourage you to take a probiotic supplement on an empty stomach in the morning instead of later on. If you've enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and check out our website, fixyourgut.com. We'll see you next time.